I guess all my precious things are gone. Oh, I can't hear you. 'Cause I'm not listening. How did I live like this for so long? I don't have time to hear shit that I knew. I guess all my precious things are gone. I guess all my precious things are gone. They're gone.
Hello everybody. How you doing today? Welcome in. As you can see today, I am flying solo. Matt is once again under the weather. So, we are going to be doing this. And we're going to keep rocking the podcast every Monday from 6 to 9 to make sure that you guys are getting the music content that we had promised to you guys. Big shout out, first of all, to S-Dog also for being one of our first Patreon subscribers. So thank you to S-Dog for that. And today is probably going to be a bit of a shorter podcast because usually we have some back and forth going on. But like I said, I wanted to make sure that we were making sure that we were coming on a regular basis to do the podcast. And I wanted to honor that commitment. So here I am, flying solo. So hopefully you stick around and enjoy our list for tonight. We are going to be doing the top 50 front persons of all time. Now, you might say to yourself, well, what exactly is that? We are classifying it as the top 50 men and women who have fronted bands. So this is not a top singer list. This is the top frontmen. If we were doing a top singer list, this list would definitely be completely different. And this is my top 50. So feel free to disagree. I think some of them, for those of you who know me, some of these are going to be pretty obvious that I'm going to have on here. And we're going to get into it today. So once again, thank you to everyone who is here listening, and we will get into it. So without further ado, where I'm going to start on this list, okay, is one of the most charismatic men in funk music. And he is a legend when it comes to music in the funk category. As a frontman, unbelievable charisma. And we are going to put George Clinton in at number 50. He was the front man for Parliament. He was also the front man for Funkadelic. He also did Parliament and Funkadelic, or like when they had the merger of the two. Unbelievable frontman. Unbelievable. Brought so much energy to the shows, like not only the vibe that he put out for his lyrics, but stage presence and everything. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. And, they were also one of the Lifetime Achievement Award recipients at the Grammys. So George Clinton is coming in at number 50. Now, number 49. This is going to be a bit of a, for those of you who were listening to the previous podcasts, you guys know I am Canadian. I am a proud Canadian, and I always like to make sure there is Canadian content on these lists. And if you remember back, I talked very highly of Rob Baker and his influence on Canadian guitar players through the Tragically Hip. I want to put him a little higher, but I feel like the best spot for him is Gord Downie at number 49 of the Tragically Hip. The man was a poet, an absolute poet. His lyrics not only were great storytelling, poetry, but he also touched on many social issues that were going on in Canada. Unfortunately, passed away far too soon. But to give you an idea of his impact, his last concert ever held in Kingston, Ontario with the Tragically Hip had, I believe it was around 4 million people watching it on the CBC. It's the most watched Canadian music live concert ever. Heck, they're probably going to put him on money, at the very least a stamp here. And he also received the Order of Canada, which is one of the highest honors a civilian can get in Canada. So number 49 is going to go to the one, the only, the great, we miss him, Gord Downie. So this moves us up to number 48 on the list. Now, for me, I always thought his voice was very unique, coming in at the number 48 spot. Very versatile singer, very charismatic as well, and wrote some amazing vocals, but also had a great stage presence. Their music videos as well were very artistic, and it lent to his style quite a bit. And we're going to go with Michael Stipe from REM. Just all you have to do is watch an REM video, and you will see the artistic side of a truly great frontman who goes underappreciated quite a bit, in my opinion. Michael Stipe at number 48 is definitely one of the ones that definitely needs to have some recognition for sure. And like I said, he kind of transitioned from the 80s into the 90s into the 2000s fairly seamlessly. So we're going to go with Michael Stipe, coming in at number 48. Now, this is where things started to get a little dicey because I had about four guys that could have fit into. I had about four guys that could have fit into this part. And you really, these next three or four, you could put in any order, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. But when it comes to frontmen, this guy has vocal range. If you've ever seen them live, he brings so much energy, whether it was as a member of the Misfits, Sanheim, and this is going to obviously tell you who it is, or is the lead singer of Danzig, Glenn Danzig. There's a few guys on this list who have fronted multiple bands, and it's very hard to have fronting one band, let alone, being able to front bands as popular as Danzig and the Misfits. Vocally, it was melodic, but it was also very raw and very gritty, and like I said, he kind of mixed like that heavy metal punk, some would even say horror punk, and it's just his performances were always like, if you went to a Danzig show or a Misfits show, you were in for it and you were gonna have a damn good time there. So we're gonna go with Glenn Danzig at number 47. I almost said number 7. Getting ahead of myself here. But at number 47. Now, at 46, this one is another guy that fronted multiple bands. Now, the thing with this next singer is those bands, some of them were critically acclaimed, but two of them really, 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 actually, there's probably three, but one went very mainstream, and the other ones were, if you were a fan of this band, you were a fan of his follow-up work, but God, I think he fronted like 7 bands, maybe even 8 at some point. So at number 46, we're going to go Mike Patton. I'm not going to list all the bands he fronted, but Faith No More, Mr. Bungle, Tomahawk, Fantomas, the list goes on. I think there was Moonchild Trio, Dead Cross, and the list goes on. Like, if I kept naming them, we would have a 4-hour podcast, it feels like. But Mike Patton really became like the household name through Faith No More. Faith No More toured with some of the biggest bands of the late 80s, early 90s, and you could even argue they were one of the originators of the whole rap rock genre. Before Rage Against the Machine did it. So he was kind of a bit of a trailblazer in that regard. But at the end of the day, Mike Patton, I think, fits in good at number 46. And I think he is definitely one of the more charismatic and one of the most underappreciated lead singers and frontmen out there. So at number 46, we're going to have Mr. Mike Patton, which gets us to 45. Now, this one I have a feeling might be a little controversial for some that I have him this low. Then you're going to have others who will say, just kind of surprised you had him on the list. And the reason I have him on here is he brought like this whole different energy to the frontman role. He really, really did. And, I'm just going to say who it is. It's Robert Smith of The Cure. Great vocals. Great stage presence. Their music videos were fantastic. His live shows were just, with The Cure is just unreal to watch sometimes. And he could command a crowd. They went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2019. And Robert Smith is definitely someone that doesn't get talked about when it comes to frontmen very often. But if you're a fan of The Cure, you'll definitely appreciate that someone's got him on their list. Because I some would say I have him too low. Some will say I have him way too high. Some might put him in the 70s if I was doing a top 100 range. But for me, Robert Smith at number 45 is definitely that goth subculture lead singer frontman that definitely deserves, in my opinion, to be in the top 50. So we are going to move on to number 44. And this guy, you want to talk about energy on stage? This guy brought more energy to a live show. Even if you weren't a fan of the band, this guy would draw you in. And I think that's the sign of a phenomenal frontman, is that when you are not even necessarily interested in a band, maybe you're at a festival and you're just kind of like, I don't really care to go see these guys, but, I'm here and I'm going to check it out. But these guys, like this guy, just drew you in no matter what band you were there to see. And he was if you ever look up an interview of him, he was hardcore as anybody. And this is Henry Rollins, lead singer for Black Flag. State of Alert was one of his earlier bands, and then he had Rollins Band, and they brought energy, especially Henry Rollins. And if you were ever just looking to go to a show with a high energy vibe to it, that's the show you go to. You go see Henry Rollins. Because, and let's, the other thing too, I have to mention, if you ever listen to an interview with Henry Rollins, he didn't mess around. He was not messing around when it came to doing an interview. He was very much a tell it like it is type. He wasn't playing a part. Some singers you saw, late in the 80s and into the 90s, they felt like they had to have this aura around them. And he was just, I'm here and we're doing this effing show and let's do it. So Henry Rollins at number 44 is my choice. Now, I said the Robert Smith selection might be controversial. This one will probably be. I probably could have him a little higher, but I'm gonna put him here because I feel like it's for like I said, because this is a solo podcast for me tonight. I feel like this is the spot for him. But I know he's got his fans out there, and there's going to be people out there saying, how the hell do you have him at number 43? And I'm just going to say anybody who makes it into the top 50 frontmen or women on this list are in the top 50 for a reason. So I think depending on how much of a fan you are, you might have them higher. I am going to go with Morrissey. You know, the Smiths. The Smiths were one of the biggest acts of the 1980s. One of the reasons, and he's had a great solo career, but this is also, like I said, frontman. And he was the lead singer of the Smiths from 1982 to 1987, and so I'm basing it on that time that, you know, he was a frontman, and he's that great of a frontman that he fronted a band for 5 years, and he's still made this list. His songwriting, his stage presence, his vocal range is unbelievable. And for me, it's a deserving spot considering this is frontman. Now, if this was, like I said at the start of the podcast, if this was a, basing it on vocals, he would be much higher. But because we're doing frontmen, this is the perfect spot for him, in my opinion. So at number 43, we've got Morrissey. Now, similar story for this guy coming up. I think he goes very, very, very underappreciated a lot of the time. And he's this British Canadian guy, so I kind of have that connection too. So here's one of those ones where he's maybe I have a bit of a biasy here, but we are putting in at number 42 Paul Rodgers. And Paul Rodgers was the lead singer for Free. Probably most known for Bad Company and The Firm. And you know, I wasn't the biggest fan of this, but he also was the lead singer for Queen in the mid 2000s on a tour. And you know, that's an impossible gig to win, but the fact that he was even selected to be in that position speaks volumes for Paul Rodgers. And Bad Company was just one of those in-your-face rock bands that, you know, Feel Like Making Love is just one of the greatest songs to be written, and he was part of that. He was a major influence on John Mellencamp, for example, and I think part of the reason why Queen had him as their lead singer is Freddie Mercury. Loved Paul Rodgers and always said that he had this aggressive style. So I feel like number 42 is the good spot for Paul Rodgers. And, you know, maybe he could be higher. But that is where I am going to put Mr. Paul Rodgers. And love his voice. Amazing singer. And number 42 goes to him. Now, number 41. Now, if I said this guy's name, unless you're a hardcore fan of this band, you're probably going to sit there and say, who the hell is this? When you find out who he sings for, though, it changes the game. And so at number 41, I'm going to put Joe Strummer. Joe Strummer was the lead singer of The Clash, well, co-lead singer of The Clash. And just one of those perfect guys for that band. Like, he just fit. He just fit perfectly. He's just one of those singers that unfortunately passed away in the early 2000s. But, you know, the range that he could do from like a reggae vibe to a ska vibe to a dub vibe, funk, rap, rockabilly, he just had so much range. On top of like that alternative rock voice and persona, that he was just he's right there. And it's just one of those things where, like, I wish he might have been around a little bit longer. He was 50 years old when he passed. Just to, see if we could get a little bit more. I know it sounds bad trying to squeeze, blood from a stone, but he was that great of a vocalist that, you wanted to just constantly hear new music. And so for me, Joe Strummer comes in at number 41. And now we get to number 40. We are going to have our first female entry on this list. And I'm going to be pretty honest here. I don't know much about her influence on others. I am sure she did play a major influence. But I am going to put Grace Slick at number 40. Singer for Jefferson Airplane. Then spin-offs like Jefferson Starship and Starship. They had this just surreal, psychedelic rock, prog rock, blues, pop vibe that was a really great fit. And like I said, she kind of fit into that role perfectly. And this was in a time where there's maybe one or two others on this list that she was kind of like in that, she was in that boys club back in the late 60s. And, Somebody to Love, White Rabbit are just phenomenal vocals. And, then, you move forward and then they do We Built This City and Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now. And it's just this perfect match made in heaven with Grace Slick. And you say Grace Slick and you might not, but then you might not recognize the name, but then you start mentioning the songs and you go, oh yeah, I know that. And great vocalist, great stage presence. You kind of had to have that great stage presence at that time because there were so many musicians just everywhere in the late 60s. So Grace Slick comes in at number 40. Now, number 39. Where do we go with number 39? Number 39, I am going with. I almost want to put. I don't want to change my list mid go here, but I think I'm gonna stick to my original list. I'm gonna stick with it, folks. We are going to go at number 39 with one of the more uniquer voices on this list. Very unique voice, very unique stage presence. And he just kind of had that he had that vibe where there was so much talent, but he kind of had that appearance that he could have been at your local jam night. And I always thought that was really, really cool. And that is Lou Reed. Fronted Velvet Underground. Really was like a godfather to the underground alternative music scene. And I feel like he just there's a lot of times, like a lot of these people who we've named so far don't necessarily get the recognition they deserve in the spots that I feel like they should be. So we are going to go with Lou Reed at number 39. And this is where it comes in. If I go to my next two, this is why I feel like maybe I could have moved him up a bit. But at number 38, this is a name that everybody's going to know. First came on the scene as a drummer for this little known band called Nirvana. And then formed the Foo Fighters. And that's Dave Grohl. If you all you have to do is go to a Foo Fighters concert and you are going to see electricity. I don't know if there is a better rock and roll scream than Dave Grohl. The man broke his leg and went back out on stage with a doctor holding his leg in place and played for 2.5 hours. If that just doesn't say badass frontman, I really don't know what does. And he's just that prototypical frontman who also has this just unique addition of being like the nicest guy in rock and roll. Usually you hear about frontmen and it's like, great frontman, but what an asshole. You will never hear that about Dave Grohl. Except for maybe one person, but at one point in time. But I believe they've mended fences since then. But you will never hear anybody talk ill of Dave Grohl, and he's one of the absolute best frontmen out there today. Which moves us into number 37. And you know, we're going to stay in the same neighborhood here. We're going to stay in that same neighborhood. Hell, we're going to stay on the same block. Because when Nirvana was cutting their teeth in Seattle, this band was also cutting their teeth in Seattle. And they are arguably the biggest musical act to like music or band, let's say band. They are arguably one of the biggest bands to come out of Seattle. And that's Pearl Jam and their lead singer, Eddie Vedder. Now, some will say, it sounds like he's, singing with marbles in his mouth, and very much so. But early Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder, he was just electric. The guy was jumping off speakers into the crowd. He took a Seattle vocal, lead, frontman position. And you have some great frontmen out of Seattle in that time, and there's going to be another one coming. But Eddie Vedder had the energy, and he wasn't afraid to get up and close with his audience. Let's just say that. And always, you never hear someone walk away saying that Pearl Jam put on a bad show. And a big part of that is the energy, maybe not so much later on in their career, but early on, Eddie Vedder was a monster frontman. And I think well deserving of the 37th spot. Now, we're going to get back into a spot here where, once again, if you're a fan of metal music, you're going to sit there and be like, well done. And if you're not a fan of metal music, you are going to sit there and be like, why? But like I said, this is frontmen, not vocalists, but frontmen. And guys that brought the energy and is synonymous with being a frontman. This individual was the lead singer for bands like Elf, Rainbow, also a stint with Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell, and of course his own band with his last name. And we are going with Ronnie James Dio at number 36. And this guy is one of the most influential heavy metal vocalists in the history. If you ever watch a metal video where they're throwing up the horns, the devil horns, that's Ronnie James Dio. He made a hand gesture, a cult phenomena that people would do all the time. Look, you could, even other bands were copying it, like AC/DC. And he had success on multiple levels. He replaced Ozzy Osbourne in Black Sabbath. He is just, when it comes to frontmen and when it comes to metal, it doesn't get much better than Ronnie James Dio. So, for that reason, I am putting Ronnie James Dio in at number 36. Which brings us to number 35. And this one will be controversial. I feel like after the guitar one, I kind of feel like some people are going to think we're hating on this man. And that's the furthest from the case. Another great metal vocalist that transitioned maybe more rock, but in their day was one of the best metal singers, and that is Mr. James Hetfield of Metallica. Go down the list. Like, for me, I think his best vocals were the things from And Justice for All and before. Um, and I think he was the best frontman for a good chunk of metal music from the 80s into the 90s when the Black Album came out and that tour hit, and they had obviously a little more budget with custom stages and so forth. James Hetfield made sure he touched every single part of it while playing the guitar. And I'm not 100% sure on this, but he's at least one of the first, if not the first, to have multiple microphones all over the stage. And if you're familiar with Metallica shows from the 90s, they had this big stage where there was a pit in the middle and you had to walk out. It's kind of commonplace now, but back then it was fairly unique. And he would have his main stage mic, and then he'd have two out at the top, and he'd have two midway because he just didn't want to stay still. And he is a phenomenal vocalist, tons of energy, always gets the crowd hyped and pumped up. And so for that reason, I'm going to have James Hetfield at number 35. Now, this next one, I'm not going to lie to you. This one is a bit of a guilty pleasure pick. This one is one of my top three singers, vocalists, frontmen. He was a wild child. I don't think the band he fronts even gets a record deal, right? Doesn't even get a record deal if it's not for him and his theatrics and his performances. Some will say, how can you put him in front of some of these other guys? But to truly appreciate what this man did, at a time where everything was really angry, and he was kind of, that hippie flower child throwback to the 1960s vibe. At number 34, we are going to put Shannon Hoon of Blind Melon. And as I said, the band probably doesn't get signed without Shannon Hoon as their vocalist. They've tried to replace him since, and it's just never worked. Now, this is also a guy who urinated on the crowd in Vancouver, would notoriously, probably one of the biggest shows they ever did at Woodstock 94, he was, let's just say, on some stuff where he put on a white dress and some berets in his hair and went out in front of 100,000 people and put on a show. And it was a hell of a show. And when you're talking about charismatic frontmen of the 90s, he has to be top 5. Easy. When you're talking about charismatic, unpredictable, just get ready because you're about to be in for a show and you don't know what's coming. That was Shannon Hoon. And another guy, unfortunately, passed away of an overdose while on tour, and far too soon. So at number 34, we are going to go with the late, and in my opinion, great Shannon Hoon. At number 33, another frontman where you never know what is about to come at you. very unique voice, very unique stage presence. And he's I think he's one of those singers where the band, this is one of the instances where the band is more famous than the members in it. Because if I say the band Tool, everybody knows it. But if I just went out and said Maynard, you guys would be sitting there going like, who? And I'm just going to be sitting there saying Maynard James Keenan. What are you talking about? You don't know who that is? But it's one of those instances where when you watched a Tool music video back in the day, you never really saw the members. It was all animation and claymation. And then you go to see them live, and his stage presence is euphoric. He obviously, his vocal range is, well, not to be the exact same, but kind of in a way of like the Shannon Hoon type, right? Where he could go really, really high. Not to say he's like him, but Maynard's voice is very unique, but he had, such range on his voice and put on such a phenomenal show. He could stand in one spot even, and you'll just be glued. Your eyes are glued to him when you're watching a Tool show. And I feel he needs to be in the top 50. And this is a good spot for him. So at number 33, we're going Maynard James Keenan. Number 32 is up next. Now, we touched on one of his fellow band members in the top 100 guitarists, and this would not be a top 50 frontmen, list. This list would be invalidated if you didn't have him on here. At number 32, it's Mr. Joey Ramone. Now, what can you say about Joey Ramone? Lead singer of the Ramones, obviously. And very unique voice. One of the more charismatic performers. If you watched an interview with Joey Ramone, you might walk away going, okay. He doesn't seem to be anything particularly special. But when he got on stage, he transformed into this counterculture icon that when you went to a punk show, hell, I saw the Ramones open for White Zombie back in the 90s. And you're walking down the street on the way to this concert, and you'll see hundreds, if not, well, I wouldn't say thousands, but let's say hundreds and hundreds of people dressed like Joey Ramone. He was that cool counterculture frontman that if you wanted to rail against your parents, you cut your hair the way Joey had it. You wore sunglasses all the time like Joey did. You had that jacket on like Joey did. You probably wore the black leather gloves like Joey Ramone did. There was that level of influence across his fan base. And so Joey Ramone was not just a punk icon. He crossed metal into metal. He crossed into so many different realms without even playing that style of music. That's how respected the Ramones were and how influential the Ramones were, along with Joey Ramone, across pretty much any genre of music that was, that it was kind of like that counterculture, like rock, metal, punk. alternative, Joey Ramone had an influence, and also a fashion influence in many, many ways. So at number 32, we have Mr. Joey Ramone. Now, Matt would have loved this one, because now we're getting into the hairspray. We're getting into the big hair for number 31. And I like this spot for him, but once again, if we're in that generation conversation, some will say he's too high, some might say he's too low. But he was one of the prototypical 80s frontmen that transitioned into even larger stardom, many would say, in the 90s. And that is John Bon Jovi. So we have John Bon Jovi coming in at number 31. And once again, you go into and you look at his performances on stage, especially in like the Slippery When Wet, first album there era. He put on such a phenomenal performance every single time. And transitioning into the 90s, he changed his image. He kind of grew with the times, and even to this day, he's still one of the great frontmen for a band that I think if you take him out of it, becomes just another 80s hair band. And so for that reason, I have John Bon Jovi at number 31. Number 29 might shock. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. Number 30 is another legendary frontman. One half of the Toxic Twins. So for those of you who are listening, as soon as I say that, I'm going with Steven Tyler of Aerosmith. And Steven Tyler was, or still is, they're still out there, folks. Just could command a crowd. He's one of those guys out there that is just going to command the crowd, always put on a show. I don't know how he did it during the Toxic Twins years, with him and Joe Perry, but Steven Tyler, phenomenal frontman. Influenced many who are, I know at least one or two that are higher on this list. And Steven Tyler with Aerosmith was a monster frontman. And one of the most recognizable frontmen as well. And another one that transitioned from the 70s into the 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s. And I feel like this is the perfect spot for a Steven Tyler, and have nothing but immense respect for that guy, because battling through addiction like he did and coming out the other side and still going to this day is definitely something that many others did not do. And he was able to he's still entertained to this day. I believe he's even in his 70s at this point, and you would think he's still in his 50s. The guy has such high energy that he's just unbelievable. I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, what I was going to say is at number 29, my choice might surprise you. But we are going to add our second female on this list. And I must admit, I wasn't a big fan of them until I saw them live. And it was at a Lollapalooza back in the 90s. And I just was never a fan. And then I saw them live, and I just thought to myself, wow, was I wrong about these? Was wrong about this band? Was I ever wrong? And that singer is Shirley Manson of Garbage. She just blew me away. I don't even know how else to really describe it. She blew me away with her vocals. And it's she had that rebellious attitude, this distinct voice, stage presence. If you were to say build a alternative rock, electronic rock front woman, right, and build it to build that front woman to perfection, you end up with Shirley Manson, in my opinion. Just unbelievable. One of my favorite vocalists from that time frame, and still to this day. But as a teenager, I was that, it's all about, I was kind of hungover from the hair metal days. I was into the GNR. I was into, Aerosmith, and was very hesitant on the alternative scene until Soundgarden. But there was, I would sprinkle my interests with alternative music at the time. And Shirley Manson and her performance with Garbage won me over. Plain and simple. And so at number 29, we are putting, and I think very well deserved, spot for Shirley Manson. Now, at number 28, if this gentleman ever hears this podcast, ever sees a clip of this anywhere, I will get a tongue lashing. I would be told exactly where to go. I would be asked, who the hell am I to rank him? And I'm going to say that that's the most rock and roll thing. I said earlier about Henry Rollins telling it like it is. This guy tells it like it is. And going to be honest, not the biggest fan of the band. But you got to give credit where credit is due. When it comes to frontmen, this guy is a monster. Literally. And that is Mr. Gene Simmons from Kiss. He's coming in at number 28. And like I said, he's going to tell me how I'm wrong in 18 different ways, and then he'll turn me around and then tell it to the back of my head, and then turn me around to the side, and he'll tell it to my right side, and he'll tell it to my left side until it sinks into my brain that 28 is too low for Gene Simmons. And I get it. But I feel like the people I have above him, in my opinion, and who am I, right? Right, Gene? Who am I? But in my opinion, I feel like being the 28th greatest frontman is no small feat. And with that, Mr. Simmons, I apologize. but I have you at number 28. Now, at number 27, we have another great punk. And you might be thinking, like, this guy really loves his punk music. And the answer to that is, well, I was not the biggest punk guy out there. But once again, this guy is kind of like that punk rock, garage rock, hard rock, shock rock, and I think he must have influenced Axl Rose at one point, because this guy moves on stage like sometimes like a snake, sometimes like a gazelle. And sometimes just like a maniac, and that is Mr. Iggy Pop. You know, called the Godfather of Punk. He was the lead vocalist for the Stooges. And, you know, they were an on-again, off-again band through the years. But they were just raw and had this primitive style to them that, you know, I've seen performances of his on stage, but I would online, but I would love to be able to take in an Iggy Pop performance before I'm too old to be taking in an Iggy Pop performance. But you know, he collabed with some of the biggest names. He really did. And like David Bowie as one example. And he would put on these controversial performances, you know? He did like self-mutilation on stage. You know, and you know, by today's standards, you would be sitting there thinking like, well, that's creepy because of what we know about mental health today. But Iggy Pop was as shock rock can be at the time. So, with that said, I've got Iggy Pop coming in at number 27. Talking about shock. This frontman was one of the most innovative frontmen out there. When their first album came out, everybody was like, "Who's this?" And then you see him on stage, and if you've never seen this band live and seen this man perform, it's something to behold, because I don't think any words I could put out there would do him justice, and that is Mr. Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. Now, Trent Reznor is a musical genius, in my opinion. He obviously, Nine Inch Nails doesn't exist without Trent Reznor, and you're never replacing him. And he's just got this stage presence to him that is eerie, but it's also very hypnotic in a way, where you're just taken in to the show. And I might sound like a broken record, but you're not leaving a Nine Inch Nails show without having your mind blown by what Trent Reznor does night in and night out when he's on tour. So for that reason, I have Mr. Trent Reznor at 26. So that brings us now to the top 25. And I would like to know or hear from you if you think my top 25, if there's someone in the in the first 25 that should be higher on this list. And would love to hear your thoughts about that before I get into the top 25. And think about those first 25 that are on there. And then when you listen to the second half of this list, see if I got it right or I got it wrong. But I think you guys are going to have a really hard time disagreeing with me on this next gentleman. To kick off the top 25, he's known by a single name. The man plays a bass guitar through a guitar amp. One of the most unique sounds. One of the most unique voices. And would legitimately kick your ass every single time he took the stage. And that's Lemmy from Motorhead. Lemmy was a monster. And he lived the rock and roll lifestyle. Like, if you were to sit there and say, paint a picture of the rock and roll lifestyle, you would paint a picture of Lemmy. There's famous stories about Lemmy where he would have his mail delivered to the bar. Legitimately had his mail delivered to the bar because he was there drinking, smoking. He was, taking in the entertainment at the bar. And would then go on stage and go and play a 2-hour set. No problem. In terms of influence, huge influence on so many. But Ace of Spades and No Sleep Till, on the No Sleep Till Hammersmith, like, it's just, I don't even know how much to say about him. But he was your prototypical rock and roll frontman that would legitimately kick your ass with his friendly little mutton chops, and, his fashion was another thing that influenced so many. And, you knew when Motorhead was taking the stage, and Lemmy was a massive, massive part of that for not only Motorhead, but for everyone he influenced moving forward. Now, at number 24, we have our third female on the list. And she didn't give a damn that she had, that she had a bad reputation. She just didn't give a damn. She loved her rock and roll. And that is the one, the only Joan Jett. Founding member of the Runaways early on. Went on to do Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. And, just this amazing, amazing presence on stage. and took control of a crowd, which was not easy at that point, for female vocalists to do. It's just the truth. She's considered the queen of rock and roll, and she's earned that. And when you talk about live performances, she can jump on stage with members of Nirvana and command the crowd, and that's not an easy spot to jump into. So, Joan Jett, major influence on many female artists and how they are on stage, I feel. And that's why I have Joan. And we're getting into the heavy hitters now, folks. From number 30 on, I feel like these are some everybody on this list is a heavy hitter. Let me just clarify. Everybody is. But we're getting into some frontmen and women who are extremely influential and really did put on a fantastic show for people who went to see them. And at number 23, we have Sting. With the Police, Sting was a monster. They always put on a phenomenal show, from, whether they were in their new wave, phase, or they were in, they covered so many genres. New wave, rock, jazz, reggae, classical, it takes a powerful front person to really have a presence like that. And singers, he's definitely in the top 100. Songwriters, he's in the top 100. One of the greatest artists in rock and roll. Hell, he's probably in the top 100. I'd have to look it up. Greatest musicians of the 20th century. And, I think he would have been definitely higher on this list. But in terms of stage presence, because he was also playing the bass a lot of the time, he could still command a crowd, but he wasn't necessarily that monster frontman, but he was a monster musician, if that makes any sense. So I have Sting at number 23. Number 22, I've got get the words out. I've got another Canadian going on this list. Now, we have one Canadian on this list so far. We have a half Canadian on this list so far. And this gentleman is another full-blown Canadian. He is honestly one of the coolest people. I've actually had the opportunity to meet him, and that is Mr. Geddy Lee from Rush. But Geddy Lee, as a frontman, is so unique in terms of he's playing keyboards, he's playing the bass, and just ask any Rush fan what it's like for them to be at a Rush show. progressive rock was really not my thing, but being the front man of a three-piece is not the easiest thing in the world. Geddy Lee has influenced so many. He's an icon, especially all around the world. He's an icon, but especially in Canada. And so that's why I have Mr. Geddy Lee in at number 22. At 21, and I'm going to get some slack for this because I know how hard Matt fought for David Gilmour. I know how hard he fought for David Gilmour. I, on the other hand, have more above him. So at number 21, we're going with Mr. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. It's Pink Floyd. Like, I sometimes feel like once we get into some of these upper rankings, they really start to not need an explanation. If I have to explain why Roger Waters or any of these people coming up are not powerful frontmen or women, I just feel like sometimes when I'm talking about some of these musicians, I'm kind of preaching to the choir in many aspects because they're so well known. But Pink Floyd is kind of speaks for itself, and so maybe I'll keep my explanations as to why I put these people in these positions a little bit shorter now, since the majority of these are going to be very well known, and also we're now into the top 20. And I'm going to kick off the top 20 with one of the most well-known and the greatest Irish frontman of all time, in my opinion. But he was such a monster in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and heck, I think he was even a Times Person of the Year one year, for his philanthropy. I just got to start getting these words out. And that is Bono from U2. So Bono is going to kick off our top 20. Which brings us to number 19. And at number 19, another frontman gone far too soon. But he could sing. He could sing with the best of them, to be honest. And if you look at his time in Soundgarden compared to his time with Audioslave, there's no denying Chris Cornell is one of the top 20 greatest frontmen of all time. I don't even think anybody would question me on that. Soundgarden was, when he was younger, was very head banging. They were kind of in that grunge to metal, realm. And then Audioslave with the guys from Rage Against the Machine transitioned almost seamlessly. And so Chris Cornell at number 19 for me on the 50 greatest frontmen is a well-deserved spot. At number 18. See, I always get nervous when I put metal vocalists or frontmen on a list, because one thing about metal fans is they will fight for their guy tooth and nail. And I mean, no offense to any of this, but I don't think 18 is being very offensive. But once again, you have a guy who from the UK, and I'm seeing there's a lot of great frontmen from the UK on my list, but he started out as like a British new wave heavy metal singer in a band called Samson, and later became known as the vocalist for the iconic Iron Maiden, and that is Mr. Bruce Dickinson. Will be in at number 18. Just once again, another guy who just commands his audience, and they will make sure that you remember that Bruce Dickinson is one of the greatest metal singers, and he puts on one hell of a show. One hell of a show. At number 17, in the 90s, I thought he was the greatest frontman in the world. And then I saw Freddie Mercury. Well, I saw Live Aid in 85. I saw the videos of that. And as I grew older, I became more educated on music and, but as a young teenager, I thought this guy was the baddest man on the planet when it came to being a front man. His stage presence was unbelievable to me. He probably ran a marathon on stage every single night. And so I am putting at number 17, Mr. Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. Guns N' Roses is my favorite band, bar none. Slash is the reason I picked up guitar. Axl was always that, hell, he started riots. I can't even count. There was at least 3 riots that he started. He could command the crowd. He could also throw temper tantrums, though, and walk off stage, which just made it even more of an allure of who is this guy. So for me, Axl Rose comes in at number 17. And that moves me to number 16. Now, this is where I had a little bit of a conundrum. And it was between, do I put Bruce Dickinson at 18 and this guy at 16, or do I put this guy at 18 and Bruce Dickinson at 16? But at number 16, I have Mr. Rob Halford of the one and only Judas Priest. One of the greatest heavy metal singers. Eccentric. Some of the outfits he wears on stage, I will say, are a little eccentric. Rob Halford amazing performer, amazing frontman. Like I said, I'm not going to get too deep into detail on their credentials because, well, their credentials speak for themselves. And Rob Halford, for me, is well deserving of being number 16 on the list. Now, we're into the top 15. And this is my last female on the list. And for me, I thought her voice was just beautiful. She could command the crowd. I think she could have easily, well, she could have been a couple spots higher, but I feel like being in at number 15 on my list is one of those spots where she was part of one of the best-selling music acts of all time. You know, and her voice is a major reason why. And at number 15, excuse me, number 15, it's Stevie Nicks for me. You know, legendary front woman. Fleetwood Mac. Do you need to say anything else? If you've never heard Stevie Nicks, because I do know some younger people listen to this. If you're not familiar with Stevie Nicks, just go look up, you know, Rumors or Dreams or, you know, Edge of 17, which is probably one of the greatest rock songs of all time. Stevie Nicks for sure at number 15 for me. Now we are going to get into one here that I think my cohort Matt here would have selected if he was feeling up to it. Another Rock and Roll Hall of Fame frontman. Lead singer of Whitesnake. Was also the lead singer of Deep Purple. And then transitioned into a solo career. But like I said, we're looking at frontmen and women. So we're looking at his time with Whitesnake and with Deep Purple. And that is Mr. David Coverdale. Some may say I have him too high. I think he's easily one of the greatest frontmen to have ever done it. And seems like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would also agree with me because they have him down as well. I don't think they have him this high, but I think they have him in the top 20. So take that for what you will, because I know a lot of us have a love-hate relationship with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But for me, David Coverdale at number 14. Which brings us to number 13. Now, this guy is one of my favorite rock singers. His voice is just... all you have to do is sit in a room, close your eyes, and listen to this man's voice. And then if you saw him at a concert, he'll blow you away. It's so easy for me to put him here. And that is Mr. Steve Perry from Journey. Definitely one of the greatest frontmen, and you can go down the list of people he's influenced. The number of people that have wanted to work with him over the years, and his voice is so commanding that it's undeniably he's one of the greatest frontmen to ever do it. So for me, Steve Perry at number 13. At number 12, this is going to get me in trouble. Number 12 will get me in trouble here, because I've never really been a big fan. And so there is my biasy coming through here. So I'm just premising it with that. I was never really the biggest fan of him, and I feel like that's dropped him down the list for me. And I think it's fair. I feel it's fair, and it's my list, so I'm going to do this. It's Mr. Bruce Springsteen. Like I said, I've never really been a big fan of his. And I don't know what it is. I know other lists, when they talk about frontmen, will have him in the top 10. For me, he's not. Not to say number 12 is, slagging him in any way. But for me, when I see him live, and I've seen him live, it's just been like, the music's great. His vocals are great. But watching him on stage, when you see who I have in front of him, I think you'll sit there and say, like, okay, this makes sense. Because anybody at this point, we're going to be able to interchange people, and I think we can make a case for any of these guys at this point. So at number 11, with that said, we are going with Mr. Ronnie Van Zant from Lynyrd Skynyrd. Once again, Lynyrd Skynyrd, Freebird, Sweet Home Alabama. Ronnie Van Zant on stage was so entertaining. If you just go back and look at videos, unfortunately, I never saw it live, but you just, go back and just watch, Ronnie Van Zant on stage. The guy was phenomenal. And there's a reason why Lynyrd Skynyrd, even after his passing, lasted so long. And it's because they rode the coattails of Ronnie Van Zant. He's, unfortunately, the plane crash and, carrying the band between the shows, and it all lived off the legacy of what Ronnie Van Zant was and who he was. So for me, at number 11, Ronnie Van Zant is in at number 11. And that brings us into the top 10. And when I was doing this, I had the gentleman at number 9 on the list. And when I was, I'm just going to do these two together, because I feel like they go together. And they're arguably the greatest band, some will say, of all time. They were definitely the biggest band of the 60s and 70s. And so and they're so interchangeable. This is why I have them back to back. And so you could put these at, you could flip them if you wanted, but at number 10, I have John Lennon at number 10, and at 9, I have Paul McCartney. And like I said, they're interchangeable. You want to put Paul McCartney at 10 and John Lennon at 9, we can do that as well if that even matters. But they're so connected that I wanted them to be back to back, and they're the Beatles. You have to look at that and be like, well, they're the Beatles. I shouldn't even have to explain anything more than that. For me, frontmen, having two that powerful in the same band, and then you complement that with George, and Ringo, it's pretty easy to have those two in your top 10. Number 8, some might be surprised with this, but at number 8, I have Jim Morrison. And I have him this high because his voice was one of the most unique voices in rock and roll. If you just listen to Jim Morrison, right, or you hear a song come on the radio and you're wondering who that is, the minute you hear his voice, you know. And on stage, he was, he was melodic. It's like he moved to the music when he was performing, and it's easy to have him top 10. I know some people might say, well, how do you have Morrison there and not Springsteen, or Morrison should be there, outside the top 10. But for me, Jim Morrison at number 8 makes all the sense in the world, and that is where I'm going to put him. At number 7, I joked with Matt about this individual when we were doing the top 100 guitarists, and I feel like when I have the 6 guys ahead of this person, you'll understand why. But at number 7, I'm going with Brian Johnson of AC/DC. And with Brian Johnson, he stepped into the shoes of Bon Scott. Now, I know Bon Scott is not on this list. I know he's not. I apologize for the AC/DC fans if you find that disrespectful. But when looking at everything, I thought Brian Johnson was definitely the guy that brought so much energy to the stage. Not to say Bon Scott didn't, but doing it for all the years he's done it for me, Brian Johnson is number 7. At number 6, we have the man himself, the lead singer of Black Sabbath, and that is Mr. Ozzy Osbourne. There was no greater theatrical frontman than Ozzy Osbourne. There just isn't. And once again, we're talking frontmen. We're not talking individual artists. Otherwise, you would see Alice Cooper on this list, but Alice Cooper is a solo artist, and we are doing front men and women, and therefore, Ozzy Osbourne in his days with Black Sabbath, they're the kings of metal, the originators of metal, many will say. And it's that simple. Ozzy Osbourne at number 6. for me. And at number 5, we're going Roger Daltrey from The Who. Once again, we're continuing the British theme because I have so many British frontmen on this list. Everybody's probably wondering, hey, are you secretly a Brit? And the answer is no, I am not. But Roger Daltrey, The Who, maybe one of the most powerful voices in rock history. It's easy to put Roger Daltrey in at number 5. Coming in at number 4, we're going with the guy from Seattle. The godfather of grunge, the king of grunge, whatever moniker you want to give him. I'm going with Kurt Cobain at number 4 in the terms of the greatest frontmen. Kurt Cobain led a revolution in music, and on stage was such a powerful frontman. Whether he was lighting guitars on fire, throwing his guitars and busting up Dave Grohl's drum sets, jumping into the crowd. He was everything you weren't expecting to see at that time, and then it became the written code. That's what you had to be as a frontman, and Kurt Cobain did that. So for me, number 4 is Kurt Cobain. Which brings me to number 3. And this might surprise some people, but I am going with Robert Plant at number 2. Led Zeppelin. Do I need to say anything else? Robert Plant for me is at number 2. Or sorry, number 3. Roger Plant is at number 3. I apologize. At number 2, this is where I feel like some people would be like, well, I haven't seen him on the list yet. Maybe he would have been in the top 5. I didn't expect him to put him at number 2. But for me, number 2 is Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger, still out there doing his thing. And he was kind of the originator of using the entire stage. He just was. And so that's why I have Mick Jagger as the second greatest front person of all time. And number 1, you guys know me. For the people watching live, they know me. For those of you in the podcast, this... I'm pretty sure at the start of this podcast, you're like, well, I know who he's gonna put number 1. I know who he's gonna put number 1. It's a no-brainer who's gonna be number 1, and it is. It is a no-brainer, and that is Freddie Mercury is the greatest front person in the history of music. In my opinion, he's the greatest vocalist in music history. But for this case, Freddie Mercury, and I know I said I don't need to give any explanation, but for those who, and I don't know how you wouldn't know who Freddie Mercury is, he could command a crowd by just raising his hand and lowering his hand. He could have them sing on cue. He could have everybody sit on the ground. He could get the crowd to do anything. And I think one of the most telling stories about Freddie Mercury is at Live Aid. And Bob Geldof was going up to scream at the producers of Live Aid because Live Aid wasn't raising as much money And Queen came on stage on his way to run up there to yell at the producers of the show. And Queen put that crowd in such a frenzy and put on arguably the greatest rock performance of all time, to the point where a reuniting Led Zeppelin went, we have to go on after that. And that's documented. And turned that entire Live Aid around. And then people started noticing what was happening and started, donating money for that cause. Freddie Mercury is just by far and away the greatest front person in the history of music. And to be honest with you, it's not even close. I sat when I was doing this list, and, I was going, Roger Daltrey, Kurt Cobain, Robert Plant, where should I put him? I had Morrison, at 11 at one point, and Ronnie Van Zant high. Like, you could play around with this list. But I knew, and I'm pretty sure 95% of you all know, that when I started this podcast today, and I said, well, I'm going to do the 50 greatest front people of all time, men and women, who are the top 50, everybody probably went, well, I already know it's Freddie. And if you don't put Freddie, then you have no musical credibility at all. And I would have to agree if you said that, because Freddie Mercury is by far and away the greatest of all time. And it's not even a question. It's not even a question. And with that, you have my top 50 front people of all time. So we will do a quick little recap. At number 50, I had George Clinton. 49, Gord Downie. 48, Michael Stipes. 47, Glenn Danzig. Number 46, Mike Patton. Number 45, Robert Smith. Number 44, Henry Rollins. 43, Morrissey. At 42, Paul Rogers. At 41, Joe Strummer. At number 40, Grace Slick. At number 39, Lou Reed. 38, Dave Grohl. 37, Eddie Van Halen. At 36, Ronnie James Dio. At 35, James Hetfield. At 34, Shannon Hoon. At 33, Maynard James Keenan. At 32, Joey Ramone. 31, John Bon Jovi. 30, Steven Tyler. 29, Shirley Manson. 28, Gene Simmons. 27, Iggy Pop. 26, Trent Reznor. At number 25, Lemmy. At 24, Joan Jett. 23, Sting. 22, Geddy Lee. 21, Roger Waters. And when we get into the top 20, we have Bono at 20, Chris Cornell at 19, Bruce Dickinson at 18, Axl Rose at 17. At 16, we have Rob Halford. 15, Stevie Nicks. 14, David Coverdale. 13, Steve Perry. 12, Bruce Springsteen. 11, Ronnie Van Zant. Number 10, John Lennon. Number 9, Paul McCartney. Number 8, Jim Morrison. Number 7, Brian Johnson. Number 6, Ozzy Osbourne. Number 5, Roger Daltrey. Number 4, Kurt Cobain. At number 3, Robert Plant. At number 2, Mick Jagger. And at number 1, Freddie Mercury. That is my top 50 front men and women of all time. I would like to hear your opinions with this list. So if you want to leave on YouTube or on Spotify your comments, please feel free to do so. I encourage you to tell me who you think your top 10 is and who maybe I have missed or omitted from this. So I appreciate everybody coming in, watching the podcast once again, listening on Spotify, watching on YouTube, or you're watching the VODs on Twitch, or if you've been hanging out live on a Twitch channel, if you want to check us out live. We're live every Monday from 6 to 9 p.m. And I encourage you to come by and hang out and take in the podcast. We will be having the podcast up or on YouTube and Spotify every Tuesday following the live Monday stream. And I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen, hang out, and please feel free to share your comments. This is the Sonic Therapy Podcast. Before we go, thank you to our Patreons, which is S-Dog. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you to everyone who hung out in the lives chat tonight. Really do appreciate that. And we will see you all next Monday for the third episode of the Sonic Therapy Podcast. Thank you all very, very much. Appreciate each and every one of you. You have yourself a great evening, great day, great afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Thank you so very, very much. Take care, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.